we got some super fans. We got Whole Systems, Hibzilla, and Cerebellum House. So we're simulcasting live.
Live simulcast.
Hi everyone. So we're on Dandelion's feed. Dandelion, we gotta get close.
Okay.
Like super close. It's the only way it's gonna work.
Let's see.
Cozy couch.
Like cozy, scoot together. Yes. All right, so I'm stacking functions. This is Centehua Sage, and this is Dandelion, and we're all live on each of our. We're in a band together.
We're trying to break the matrix with the Trinity.
we're testing out the interwebs.
So I have to say, on my end, I've had audio issues. So if it's unclear, I apologize. Just jump on Eric or Centi's.
Oh yeah, if Dandelion's audio sounds like this,
which it has for about 2 months,
then you can.
And I have no idea why.
Then you can log on to Centehua Sage or Stacking Functions.
I tried my headphones this time, so maybe people can hear through that.
That's why teamwork.
Yet to be determined.
Yeah.
So our framing contraption seems to work relatively well. And welcome everybody who's here. Very cool.
Can you restate the sort of intention of the discussion? Eric's totally zoning. As far as we would like to talk about permaculture tonight, and we were having some discussions about those topics. So would you just like to set a framework for us as far as what you may have been talking about recently? You were doing some talks. I heard you talk about water, stuff like that, the fires. So what exactly about permaculture will we talk?
Oh, what a great prompt, Dan. Thank you. As our superfans know, on Let's Talk Permaculture, we talk about all things permaculture, and there's some themes, though. There's some themes about what are we doing. There's a little bit of a proactivity theme about like what are we really doing. And so one of my understandings is that one of the things that we can all do together is to do things together. And so finding ways to share, basically. And I actually just listened to Winona Laduke. She's really amazing.
From Standing Rock and etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd heard of her. What's the right word? Her her reputation. I heard like she was very reputable, and so I knew of her, but wasn't super familiar with her work. And one of the so I listened to one of her YouTube talks today. It was a lecture, and she talked about one of the things she mentioned is how radically inefficient the United States culture is. Like we have gross inefficiencies, and that's part of what's I'll say plaguing us now in a way. And the problem is the solution, really. So as much as inefficiency is our problem, the solution is efficiency. And one of the quickest ways that all of us can become more efficient within our lives is to collaborate with one another. So I think learning how we work with one another is definitely one of the themes that's been present in some of these Let's Talk Permaculture conversations, and something that we could certainly continue on with this evening.
Well, I like the pine cone as the example of efficiency. And so what you're saying is from a top-down situation, the systems that are interlocking end up being extremely inefficient in their productivity, and their system as a whole is obviously not healthy and toxic and has synthetic aspects to it that probably need a little bit more soil and bacteria in there. So I think a lot about biomimicry. I've been thinking a lot about how all these systems need to be designed as close to biological organisms as possible. So like plants being the way that we design, matter, so to speak. So I've been this kind of idea came about using mallow, wild mallow. When you soak it, it becomes goopy, and then mushroom mycelium as a fusion of plant and mushroom, and that growing some sort of styrofoam and can be pressed into a styrofoam cup and then dried, and so things like that, kind of taking the systems that we have and trying to redesign them to be biological, because like dandelions are solar panels, and they're really good at sequestering sunlight, and so those are some thoughts.
Yeah, Dandelion brought up a super key word, which is biomimicry. And so biomimicry, if you're not yet familiar with it, is a really important term to become aware of. And it's basically acknowledging the wisdom of nature and her radical efficiency. And most of our cultural systems are linear rather than cyclical and point to point versus ecological web. And so how I see our own lives relating to our social network and all of our points of relationship, both like financially, socially, work life, food, housing, all these relationships that we have within our lives and within our lifestyles, the more we can see that web of interrelation through the lens of ecology, I think really empowers us to begin to make beneficial upgrades to our life. So yeah, that ecological lens, I think, is super important.
Stacked functions.
You might have heard of it.
I did. What do you think, Centi?
I think,
Or if you...
yes, I think this biomimicry concept is so important, not just in the obvious of how we are organizing our systems and in the ways that we live, in the ways that we distribute food, resources, all that stuff, but also on a deeper psychological and emotional level, like how are we impacted by this idea that we are to be self-sufficient and do everything. That doesn't work. It feels that people are isolated, and we are all kind of in our boxes with our nuclear family, not realizing with the world is an important shift of mentality that I think is happening right now, because I think that's at the root of a lot of our emotional and psychological problems, is this feeling of aloneness, of not feeling rooted and connected to a community.
So that makes me think of how I'm traveling around, trying to meet and visit with different communities and really try to get a sense of what's going on across the country and who's got what and who's figuring what out at a different level of sustenance and sustainability for each of us. And so part of biomimicry as a whole is adaptation in the local system and figuring out how to kind of maneuver through what is the universe sort of providing us in this niche, in this time and place, and so how can we then share that? And so what we've done is largely...
Who's we?
We as the United States has largely created the only food revolution that was allowed, empowered Central California to blast the whole country with organic. And we didn't necessarily get a roots up movement. We didn't get a nodal situation like who grows the squash best, who grows the corn best, who grows the this best, and figure out an interlocking network of people who are able to share that and share within that experience from a mesquite level, from a yerba santa level, from a, who grows the corn best. Some bioregions are really good for corn production. Other bioregions are really good for whatever, mesquite. So how can we sort of take that the whole system has too many complex parts and sort of scale it back down into like what can we do about it and from here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd like to pause for a minute and say hi to everyone who's following along here on this simulcast Instagram Live. We're all leaning in. It's Let's Talk
Hard to read the
Permaculture.
comments.
Let's Talk Permaculture. So we're on all of our Instagram Lives right now, and so which is really, really exciting because we're getting to meet new people along the way, and managing the comments is going to be a little bit challenging.
Instagram did that shit on purpose. It's like super tiny. Why do the comments have to be super tiny? Just to fuck with you.
Yeah, Dandelion's feed is pausing some.
No,
so
I think it's chilling. Oh, there you
it
go.
should be better.
I was off of Wi-Fi, so hopefully that helped. But I've had all kinds of webcasting issues, so sorry. I'm trying.
Yep. And hello to everyone who's joining us Beyond Organic, Sacred Crescent,
Beyond organic.
Beyond organic.
some
Oh,
of
yeah.
the friends on Centehua's. Hi, Centehua's friends. El Kahili, what's up? So yeah, we're talking permaculture, and we're talking. So Dan's prompt was in a sense like,
What have we been talking
what okay, how about this? Like, to me, it sounds like you're saying, how can we create shifts in the operating systems of the culture and the way that we engage in it?
Yeah, and how can we then figure out the scale of what we can do, and how does that interlock together instead of us all becoming, for example, multinational corporations of our own egos, or
Yeah.
our own pine palace, like I'm the pine nut king. How do we kind of create an ethical bioregional share, local resource sharing, things like that, something that's more localized, township level, than sort of trying to manage the whole system.
Well, so for those who have followed along with this, they may have heard me talk about something similar, and it's it's a concept that maybe we haven't expressly talked about before ourselves, and that is the smallest functional unit size to effectively be a human on this planet it could be like a family group, basically. And so the heteronormative couple-centric nuclear family, that unit size, that cluster size, is rife with inefficiencies, right? And basically inefficiencies in our consumer system are expressed in requiring more energy in the form of money, right? And so
You're saying the American dream drives us into
an inefficient
system of inefficiency.
Exactly, right?
Yes,
so
okay.
exactly,
and
the American,
extraction.
right, which supports the consumeristic,
When you say extraction, you mean like resource extraction?
And human, like,
energy
labor.
extraction?
Well, then everyone's
Yeah.
hamster wheeling.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
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 And so, for me, the way that I see to improve the way that we as individuals relate with the culture and the system at large is to collectivize, might be the right word, but and to collect ourselves, to organize ourselves into a family unit that might be 6 to 12 people, right? And basically by getting 6 to 12 people of your choosing, like find your very, very best friends, like who's the list of 10 people that you'd go to a desert island with? Dan, you're on our list. Woohoo! Yeah, like who would you really choose as family, and then find ways to share resources, like sharing meals alone, sharing housing alone, sharing childcare alone, sharing a garden alone. there's a lot of ways we can share with one another. I didn't bring the book, but there's a book called The Sharing Solution. And yeah, it's an incredible book providing ideas for how we can share to create efficiencies. And when we create efficiencies in our lives, the way we're going to feel that is again through requiring less money to receive the same benefits. And when things cost us less money, then we can either save money, we can rest more, or we can take our excess capital, we can reinvest it into aspects of our life or our community life that we'd really like to see grow. And so that for me is a big one is like the unit size. Yeah. And so why I'm excited for Dan to be here with us tonight, especially, is because Dan in his travels gets to meet lots of people all over the country and has his, he's got some sensory perceptions of where everybody's at within figuring out a way to live. And so, yeah, I'm interested to hear from you about patterns that you see through your travels, and, are you seeing, like, how does this concept of family collaboration, like, how do you see that expressing itself in your travels, and does it seem like it's something that you're seeing grow, through these?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely am seeing a lot of people who want, say, the small community, but not the overwhelmed community, which is like when we think of eco-villages, for example, we often think that people won't have their own personal space. Mm-hmm. That causes a lot of people a lot of panic with the idea of, I like how you're coining the word sharing, because it's so childlike and wonderful in the sense of like, wait, what happened to sharing? And that's such a good way to frame it. So I feel like we are raised in the opposite of share culture, somewhat intentionally, in the sense of fear causes the desire to covet. And so we're in a position where the American dream, or whatever you'd like to call it, is also rigged for the sort of sequestration of resources and the fear of losing them. Not necessarily in the idea, well, if everybody shares, like, we have enough, we have enough. And what I see is that even in the elbow rubbing of the communities I go to, so much is coming up and out, and transformation has to really speed up as far as our ability to create values, communicate about the values that we're creating, have solutions, have meetings, everyone get there to the meetings. I'm really profoundly blown away by the practicality is like the hardest part. And so there's this great rush of energy I'm experiencing all over the country where people are just so into the idea of building the village and doing it and homesteading and getting off this shit system and growing our own food, and all this profound energy is like coming up and out of the earth and out of people. And the frameworks are what we're really grasping for, and we're almost like stumbling, into like, oh my God, like what are the methods in the basic human functions of our experience, because I always like to think about, and I said this today at the class, did you ever get a class in all of your educational upbringing about conflict resolution, about living with one another, about sharing, and so the educational system that we've been raised into has failed on a fundamental level of share culture and teaching that sharing is caring, and watching TV didn't work, it was more about the embodiment experience. And so I'm seeing a mad dash to find people, find the land, figure out what can grow there, wild forage, look, what's there. I mean, you know, I've been exposed to more hunting culture too. I went through the South and like I shot some big guns, and that was really intense because I'm trying to figure out how to live off the land, you know, and like, can I Daniel Boone it? And is that something that's still possible in the United States, in America, in our culture? What is the value in going back towards a somewhat Paleolithic life, a somewhat, you know, that's where those values were set, let's say. And when we were bands, we were roving bands and we traveled, we had sets of ethos, we had sets of morality, we had sets of, the shaman was there to help us, to educate us, to help us to see beyond our individual selves into why share culture provides a framework for surviving. So right now we're in the opposite of like, no, the framework of surviving is, you know, survival of the fittest.
Good thoughts. We'll take a break and read some comments. Whole System says, I totally agree. How to start and how to mobilize. Connection can be so hard. Yes. Adam Instone. Whew. What up, bro? Hi, everyone on Centehua's
Maybe we
feed.
can take each of those, that at least, and comment on that. Do you have thoughts about that? Whole Systems dropping in some deep wisdom.
Oh yeah.
Well, wait, what were you saying?
Just the idea. So, do you have multiple comments?
On what you said?
Are we?
Oh, I think there's 2 comments. I was
Yeah,
just going to
so-
read Hibzilla's also,
Cool. Yeah,
and then
go
Whole
for it.
Systems, and then I'd like to respond to
Maybe
what
we
you shared.
could.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Hibzilla said, I heard someone saying that money that actually loses value rather than gains could be a great system. Yeah, alternative currencies. I mean, there's a lot to.
Diversifying, right? Just diversifying current structures.
Yeah. Well, we
More
talked
the
about
merrier.
the 8 forms of capital, and okay. So one of the things I like that you said is you brought the word homestead, and I think that the homestead was really like this like settler construct derived by our governmental systems as a way to secure land from indigenous peoples, right? Like, oh, we'll give you land as long as you go out there and put up fences and keep everybody off of it, right? And so this American dream that is like an extension of the homestead dream,
Yes.
right? And so now it's just on like a smaller city block, and there's a white
Right.
picket fence and this, that, and the other. And so I think what's really important is to start looking at that homestead model, right? And then to interface that with like a kin family group. So instead of the mom and dad and their 12 kids on the homestead, what about 3 or 4 moms and dads and
Yeah.
their 3 or 4
yeah.
kids, right?
And shared education structure and shared
food,
resource
yeah,
structure,
shared
yeah.
vehicles, shared
Yeah.
house, shared, all the responsibilities.
I think the answer to that, or why isn't that happening? Money. And something I think a lot about is how if most 3 or 4 families are not going to be able to drop 500 grand on a piece of land that's amicable to live off of, with water, ample water. You're talking a well, $40,000 for a well. You're talking about the soil and the quality of the soil. And so it's also a very hard thing to sort of grasp.
Well, I hear that, but you can also have a suburban homestead or an urban homestead, and so no matter where you're living, you're gonna have a roof over your head, like period. So the whole point is, how can that roof over your head? How can you stack some functions and share to generate efficiency? And so even if you're renting, like rent a house on the outskirts of town with a family
Victory
or
garden.
2 families,
And
and
the
like
garden
you're
plot.
learning how to work together. You're saving money, so then you can, if you're saving money, then you can maybe actually like save money and put some away for a down payment or something like that. And then you're practicing. And that's the other thing is like Dan's point of we weren't taught how to work together. Like we just weren't. Like all of our systems, or many of our systems socially and in the business world were power dynamics of, you know, power over, power under, and how can I take advantage of resources. And so part of this whole thing is to learn how to work with one another, and that's going to come through practice. And so any chance that we have to share with one another is an opportunity to learn these ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And I think governance is a really important piece of it. And then also what you were saying is like, how do we organize? Mm-hmm. And so friends who've, you know, heard this talk previously have heard my personal ideas around organizing as for-profit farm corporate entities is a really, really advantageous way to go about securing beautiful lives for ourselves, or to work towards securing beautiful lives. And you know, that's a milestone, that's a hurdle, that doesn't have to be one's first step. There's a lot of ways to share and start generating efficiency in one's life without going to that step. And I think that's a really important tool that a lot of people can look to in time. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that you talked about is like governance. Like, what's the practicality of having a family unit mm-hmm. function in a cohesive manner? Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things that you've seen? Because you know, spoiler alert, like I'm all hyped up on the sociocracy train as a consent-based governance system mm-hmm. that's ready to go off the shelf, mm-hmm. That seems to be really, really high functioning. Maybe there's a better system out there or some things to add on. But for me, that sociocratic module of just like here's like here's a way to do it that works pretty darn good, and you could read it all and it's already ready to go. Yeah. Like what's your exposure been to sociocracy, and then have you seen that as kind of like a buzzword that's popping up in all these places you're going?
So can you give just like a 30-second sort of exposition of what exactly sociocracy, according to the book, is speaking? Which
yes.
You've told your...
Yeah, sociocracy is a governance model. And so there's a process to it. It's all consent-based. And so basically within an organization, it's a way for anything that the organization does at any point to be okay with everybody who's in the organization at that time. Mm-hmm. And so it's basically a way that a group mind can manage itself.
And so, you know, what that ends up being is, does that scale up to all of us in?
What's all of us? What's the scale of all of us?
Can we overthrow our system that we have with that methodology? And I think what needs to happen, based on what I've been observing, is small scale, like 10 to 20 people start practicing these sort of methods together, becoming sort of like home pods of, you know, all of it. And I'm thinking the ritual aspect, because like, so governance is one aspect and ritual is another aspect. And, you know, I'm seeing governance structure more than I'm seeing ritual structure, which is one of the reasons I, you know, like hanging with Centi and this kind of also connection of like, you know, some of the work is verbal and some of the work is nonverbal. And so we're stepping into kind of both worlds at once, because what it reminds me of is sort of this idea you were saying before, how, you know, we're at this Paleolithic to homesteader spectrum. And if we just compress that down and look at a time when there was a happy medium somewhere the fuck in there, where both cultures, let's say homesteader, white settler, and native people, could have just been like, let's figure out how to hybridize this to be optimal for everyone. Let's share this in a way that creates the most beautiful thing we've ever seen in the world. And so with that would have been like the fusion of, you know, intellectual, democratic, or sociocratic aspects, which are so important, but really hard to kind of push into the system that is. So, you know, we've had the Bernie Sanders experience or whatever, like anything other than that norm on a larger scale seems to go bonkers, more than like 250 people or something. So if we could start with like 10 to 20 people, 30 to 40 people, and make these little micro hubs and sort of get resilient out of that with ritual, nonviolent communication, therapy, you know, farming practices, workshops, all of it together, you know, and sort of start pushing on it that way. That's what I'm seeing as far as, you know, people stepping into that all across. And, you know, I think of what you're doing with a sacred dance and just invoking elemental aspects with dance is an amazing way to just shed things that you don't even know you have, that you know you need to let go of, but they don't need that sort of structure. And then when you come into a sociocratic model, you're ready to be in your A game, you're ready to be present.
So I love everything that you said, and I'd also really like to give you a chance to share your voice. And I'd like to check on comments also, because there's some things being written.
Let's see this video for feedback. Okay. Can I read mine?
Yeah, Dan's going to go first.
Malaposa says, we will restore Pachamama when we see ourselves as a whole collective, when we see the power of working harmoniously with all beings, all spirits. True.
Yes. And that's a great, that's great language that can be a point of cohesion in a family unit. And so I think, is it okay if I respond to Dan quickly? Okay. So, here's what's cool about sociocracy. Sociocracy is just a way to govern the whole, right? And so it's really beautiful is that we can, every time you organize an entity, it's unique unto itself, right? And what's really beautiful is that sociocracy fully supports including other practices. Will you sit a little bit closer?
Sure.
So sociocracy fully supports bringing in policies for this is how we manage our dynamic through you know, ritual or ceremony. You know, this is how we process conflict. This is how we use nonviolent communication. Sociocracy as a governance model fully supports bringing in these deeper practices as part of the fabric of the framework of the entity itself. And so that's what I think is really, really cool about sociocracy, is it's totally flexible to be whatever we choose it to be. And then, you know, and then we receive feedback.
It's a modular system that is incorporating towards perspective, and it sort of digests perspective and brings values that encourage the process to continue to unfold because it feels good and it's right, and this is the thing to do. So you're talking about a book called Sociocracy.
Not a book.
Oh, I thought there was a book.
There is a book, but it's not called Sociocracy. Sociocracy is the style of governance. The book is called We the People, consenting to a deeper democracy. And the authors are Sharon Villeneuve and John Buck. Cool. And it could be like the best $23 you ever spend, especially like for the milestone of learning how to relate with other people.
Be cool. Also, you can do like an online reading or book club. Whole Systems was doing that with a book, and it was really cool. So, you know, one of the things that I'm feeling is there's these two worlds. Like, so there's how do we intellectually organize, and use a governance system which is that sort of self-replicating meme generator of awesome, this feels great, we're building the community, we're getting the resources we need, all the vegetables are coming in, everything feels great. And then there's like, okay, how do we align some of those needed functions as a community to thrive embedded in nature, embedded in sort of astrological aspects, embedded in lunar and solar. And so having reasons to come together to do something that kind of transcends the daily bullshit, and aligning that, like inserting that with sort of astrological aspects, or I'm just simply also thinking about like the equinoxes and the solstices, like what are we supposed to do in those times, and how can we sort of reinvent those experiences to also like do some of the bridging work of our greater community into just stepping beyond the 9 to 5, the rat race, the I gotta. And so like, maybe Centi, you can share some about, how you're working those things in and the value of it.
Yeah, I feel that we are in a time of learning how to create harmony between the polarities, the pendulum swinging, but we don't have to like now swing all the way to this side. So I feel like the dance is about finding that centered place between masculine and feminine input, the polarity, the dichotomy, the intellect and the embodiment, the sensitivities. And for me, like one of the things that attracted me to a Waldorf education for my children was not only the biodynamic garden, the honoring of the astral bodies and how they merge and dance with earthly
and
bodies.
That even farming is spiritually charged, like in a deep way.
Yes.
It's not just stuff.
Yep. It's not just the science of like you put the seed in the ground and the water,
there's
and then there's absolute,
an art to it.
Yes. There's an honoring, a deepening, a ritual. And so that was very important for me, for my children to learn, and also to be in a community that supported what do we do when there is a shift in season, and what is the folklore, what are the stories, do we honor the nature spirits, like all these magical, imaginal realms that I think play an important role in the building of our communities. And so for me, it is important to learn how to share, and for me, it's about sitting in circle, which is also part of the sociocratic
It's a circle
model.
Yeah.
So that it's not. So we are kind of dismantling the hierarchical, linear communications and top-down power structures that are embedded in the fabric of the patriarchy, even in the ways that we govern ourselves within our own nuclear family.
And it's hard.
Yeah, it's gonna take some time.
Work.
That is the dance. That is the work of like really purging that from within us, from our own relationships to one another. And so I feel like the sitting in circle with council and inviting elders, I'm praying for multi-generational circles and communities where there is an elder that can model a different way of being and has a different perspective, and that helps the whole. And also that like the adolescents are there and the children, and for me, the embodiment and the honoring of the elements is very important to bring into the circle, because I think that we already have all the skills. We already have the permaculture designers and the herbalists and the people that are doers. Like we know how to
cooks.
We know how to make the soups and how to tend the children and all that stuff. But do we know how to communicate? Like, are we willing to be vulnerable and circle with one another and share from an embodied, heart-centered place? And for me, that is the work that I feel is very important, and that's the feminine balancing of let's feel one another and communicate from that place of honesty, of transparency. Otherwise, that's what blocks all the good work, because we already have the lands, we already have all the skills, but then we're all wounded, we're all a little traumatized because the earth has been traumatized. So how do we show up with our wounds and with our stuff and sit by the fire, the alchemical fire that can help us see the light and transmute all the bullshit. But all the good stuff, like that's the stuff that's going to help us grow into the maturity that is needed for us to really create resilient communities.
Yes.
So we have
Someone knocked at the door. I'd like to check comments.
comments.
Yeah. Heva, don't say that word. Yes, the elders, says Whole Systems. Sarah Bellum says, yes, love your words, Centehua, kids and stories and circles.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, Earth Ecology showed up. What up, Nick? Definitely real. Shh. They're watching. Oh, Sacred Root Alignment says, so nice to see you all together again.
Oh, shucks. So
Yay.
we have this yin and yang aspect, this very necessary structuring. What are we going to do with all the resources? Because we need resource management. You know.
That's the other thing they don't teach us in school.
No.
That's like the
No.
most critical thing, resource management.
Yeah, and like how many pumpkins does each person who's a farmer get at the end of the season is some of the hardest work, you know, and making everything feel balanced.
Fair.
And
Yeah.
that's the hardest shit in
Reciprocal.
the world. you
Right,
know?
okay, but it's the hardest shit in the world, but smart people already kind of figured it out, and that's where I feel so strongly about what?
Sorry. Smart people figure
You
it out.
don't mean us, but
Yeah, other people. I'm just like
Yeah.
finding other
But
smart
see,
people who figured
yeah.
things out and adopting it, you know?
right, and there's so much written, there's so much words, there's so much conceptual, and the question is like, how can we now take what we all have and do the most optimal thing? Like, so you talked about in the sort of in this dream vision of us having this sort of community, these community hubs all over the country where we are doing what we can do to contribute so that we can eat and live off the land and regenerate it.
Right.
This kind of process, how can we as a bunch of people right now optimize that experience, optimize that process? So yes, if everyone does the, as you mentioned, the for-profit farm, if we all go in 8 to 20 people, if we all can, and then there's like all these other steps of what people can do from here in your suburban area. And you know, I know you were doing a lot of container gardening, for example, for like, you know, and that's a really cool method that a lot of people don't even know they can sort of do in their life, and how much that could generate, you know, love, medicine, hope, and the rounds. So, you know, what I try to always come back to is what can happen right now. What can we do with what bullshit we have, as far as the toys, as far as the material realm, as far as the gasoline, as far as the Walmarts and the Whole Foodses, and like everything we're enmeshed in. How can we sort of, you know, optimize what we're at now? You know, so, you know, one of the ways that I'm thinking about that is working with Jess Starwood and Mauricia from the Gaia School, and trying to conceptualize this idea of a pop-up herbal clinic. You know, and so this is like our field, herbalism, right? What can we do? There's been a fire. What do you do at a fire? You go there and you try to help people and teach them about herbs and figure out who can wildcraft what, and what workshops can happen, and can we crowdfund and raise money, and like, let's try to do the right thing. And so I then come back to like these like gatherings. Like, it's so important that we just seem to have gatherings. We need to have gatherings, like you're saying, potlucks and solstice events and little memes, little macarinas, little fucking things that are significant to people that aren't like, oh, I wonder what that is, and you're like, it's a dogmatic religious like crazy thing, or you're like, hey, I wonder, oh my god, it's totally commercialized. And like, where can people come to like, oh fuck, this feels pretty good, you know? And that's not necessarily a function that the situation we're in has provided, like, where can teenage kids go to be exposed to anything other
Yeah.
than,
Festivals.
the whole deal. Music
Cool.
festivals,
Yeah.
which is,
So
So.
mixed results.
it can be alchemically
Yes.
transmuted
Transformed.
to the next level of,
Yeah.
wait, why are we even here? We want to be sitting around a fire,
Yeah.
eating yams out of this fire, like sharing medicine stories and what is the right dance? How do we not see just performers?
Yeah.
But how can we
Yes.
like build the revolution out of this?
Yeah.
I said the R
Renaissance.
word. The Renaissance
The
is what I
Renaissance.
meant to
Yeah,
say.
that's right. Yeah, we're Renaissance.
Yeah, the
We're creating
Renaissance. Yeah.
culture instead of buying the music. Why
Whoa.
don't we make the music?
A lot in there.
To answer your question, I feel that, like, I really feel, someone correct me if I'm wrong, go learn sociocracy and then tell me that it's a total waste of time. Like, I think you're gonna find that it's a crucial component, and maybe even a linchpin, because, like, even as Dan says, oh, here's something we can do, let's organize this thing. Well, are you gonna do that by yourself, or are you gonna do it with other people? Because the minute you start doing it with other people, you are in a collective act that has a de facto governance, whether you acknowledge it or not.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you're working with people, and that's the point that we mentioned, that we weren't taught how to work with people.
Yeah.
So if we're going to work with people, we need to learn how to work with one another, and I feel that sociocracy, it can be radically impactful in improving our capability to work with one another to generate efficiencies within our life. Like,
Okay,
you can
Yeah.
tell
So
I feel
let's
strongly
take
about
it
that.
as what is a first principle method. So, for example, could a practice of sociocracy be something like people doing group weekly calls, and they start to identify values that they all share, and start writing down values, and come from a place of what are the community values that we even resonate with, and sort of be able to articulate them, bring them out through the collective in a way that's a sort of healthy birth versus a completely traumatic birth, and sort of have that as some sort of principled documentation of we the people like have this thing we agree in, and whatever that is, whatever that collective value, it may end up being, oh, we have a food shed, oh, we're a buying club, oh, we really like Nikes and we
Right.
go in on Nike
Then you have an
sneakers,
organization. Yeah.
or whatever it can be, like, and that's back to that like local niche thing, right? Like, what is your local niche of that? And some people might really be into doing movies and potluck nights, and so the values that they raise is like, let's turn people on with movies and potlucks. Like, that's what we're so into, and like that would be a contribution towards the greater vision of eco-village building and all the, the glamour and the guts and the glory of that, and kind of getting to like, wait a minute, if we start there, could that actually start then bridging the networks? Because once we got to the point where, oh wait, 20 of us are in agreement of values, and then sort of it's a good thing and it starts bringing forth something of value, people will then come and say, hey, I like this.
Because you have a surplus.
And you start to then evolve the system to sort of stretch the boundaries, and you may end up as a totally self-functioning eco-village, or a totally self-functioning farm, or a herb shop, or a free herb clinic, or wild crafters, or almond growers, or hopefully not monocultures. All the options. Would that be an expression of sociocracy in action?
Absolutely, 100%.
Cool.
And so the way that sociocracy enables that is through a process where a mission, a vision, and an aim are all created. And so when a group of people get together, they can create coherence through a mission, a vision, and an aim. And so the mission is the inward drive, like what are we doing, like together, right? And then the vision is the what do we see in the world, and then the aim is the item of exchange, right? And that's what's actually being produced. And so if we said, hey, our vision is a community that's more aware and more connected, right? That could be our vision. Our mission could be like let's be friends, right?
Yeah.
Like that can be a mission, a drive. And
Yeah.
then the aim, like what are we actually producing?
Yeah.
Like let's do a monthly movie night and potluck. That's the actual item that we are generating. And now, and this is all through sociocratic process, then we have something that we're choosing to do. There's a proposal that we've crafted together. There's this language that keeps us in coherence, which is the mission, vision, aim. And then there's a cyclical process where we say, hey, should we check back in on this in 3 months or whatever it is? And so after we do our third potluck, we already set up the time
For the next
to
meeting.
loop back in and say, how did all that go? How does this feel? Do we want to morph? Are more people coming into the conversation? Whatever it might be. So yeah, sociocratic process, starts with the aim really of like what are we creating as a first step, and then from there it's mission, vision, and then you design like the work process. And so coming into this continuity with others to say, hey, let's do something together. Let's
That's a good
produce something together, whether it be childcare, meals,
Yeah.
housing, community, garden, whatever it is. There's a process where we can take an opportunity to start doing something together, and I think that's what's really powerful, is just to start with whatever feels good to the group.
So maybe we can take a sort of divine coincidence of, let's say that everybody coincidentally sees this because they may be able to take on that task and say, I can get 3 people or 5 people or 10 people or 25 people together and go through that simple process, or at least do one of the things that we're talking about. And so I know, a lot of people that I'm seeing names of already out there, raising awareness through so many ways. And it's just like, how can we take the next steps? What I'm hearing with you, and I guess I'm just feeling like to boil this down into a potential act that we could all engage in as some sort of ritual, because we're doing this wild trinity, is like, how can we do one of those? How can we all do one of those? So even if it's like a group call with 5 friends, or even if it's a movie, you know what I mean? Or even if it's, hey, let's practice like a sociocratic methodology in the sense of set the intention and go for it. Or organize, with people in any sort of way, just to engage the process and the practice and see where it goes. I think, there's like everybody's innovation is going to be where the solutions come out of,
To that point, if I hear what you're saying, right, the one of the most valuable things I feel we can do is to learn how to play the game. Because once you know how to play the game together, then you can create whatever is necessary at that time in that group. And so learning the process by playing together, I think, is like a really great first step that any of us can take within our local friend group or non-local friend group, like whoever we're close with.
Yeah.
Pick your 5 or 10 people, your crew, and set an intention to like, hey, let's do something sociocratically. Let's at least learn how to play the game. And I think that's a really powerful
I think
suggestion.
a lot about calls to action, and what's going to separate things from feeling like we want them to happen to things actually happening is the idea of like, okay, let me just see what kind of thing calls to me, and let me just run with it. And everybody's just capable in their own way of doing something fun and exciting and enjoyable. Just kind of like throw some salsa into the mix. We're going to need that sort of innovation from all in. Whatever it is you do, start spewing it, because if it's an art collective, like how awesome is it, the idea all day like start a a mission of, okay, we're an art collective. Even if you're one person, start doing classes at the local library. Get 12 like wonderful grandmas to come hang out with you.
Yeah.
Shit will happen.
Yes,
you
it
know,
will.
and
Yes.
that will just start blowing it up.
Yeah.
Because if your heart is in that service,
Yeah.
if your heart is in just like, wow, I want to try to do something, and it's better to do, one of my like mantras is like, at the end of my life, I would rather have tried than to wish I did, and so whatever that looks like for all of us, I think is the Gaian impulse, is ecology coming out of us to try to make the solutions occur,
I hear you.
That dance of bringing
There you go.
it,
You're
it,
inspiring my dance,
it's got to
yeah.
come through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's magic. It's when we truly meet our intentions with our whole bodies, with our hearts, and we begin to magnetize. And I think that's how we meet our kin. That's how we meet the others, is showing up with our hearts with full passion.
Yeah.